Patricia Hayes found the sketchbook in the spare room. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just making sure the cleaning supplies were neatly organized. It was one of her quirks. Everything in its place, everything perfect. But as she opened the door to the small closet where Maggie kept her things, something fell to the floor. A sketchbook, black cover, worn, with dog-eared corners. Patricia picked it up, thinking it was Maggie's personal diary. She was about to put it back where it belonged. She wasn't one to snoop through her employees. Belonging. But then she opened it, and what she saw left her completely frozen. They weren't words. They were drawings, page after page of drawings. Distorted faces, impossible landscapes, creatures that looked like they crawled straight out of a nightmare, colors that shouldn't exist together. And yet, somehow, they worked. Patricia had been an art dealer for 20 years. She'd seen thousands of works of art, worked with famous artists, sold paintings for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and she knew talent when she saw it. This was talent, raw talent, unrefined, but authentic talent. Who had made these drawings? Patricia flipped to the first page of the sketchbook. There was a dedication written in a shaky hand. For Danny, so the voices become colors. With love. Maggie. Patricia closed the sketchbook and knew she needed to know more. But to understand what Patricia had discovered, you first need to know the whole story. And I'm warning you now, this story is going to change the way you see people. Society calls crazy. Maggie Vega was 38 years old when she started working at the Hayes' residence. She was a widow. Her husband, Carl, had died 6 years earlier in a construction site accident. A beam that fell. A hard hat that didn't hold. A life that ended in seconds. Maggie was 32 years old when she became a widow. And she didn't have children. But she had Danny. Danny was Carl's younger brother. He was 29 when his brother died, and he had schizophrenia. Let me explain something about schizophrenia, because a lot of people don't understand what it really means. Schizophrenia isn't multiple personality disorder. That's a completely different disorder. Schizophrenia is a brain disease that affects the way a person thinks, feels, and perceives reality. People with schizophrenia might hear voices that others don't hear. They might see things that others don't see. They might believe things that aren't true, not because they're stupid, not because they're faking, but because their brain processes information differently. It's like they're living in a parallel reality that overlaps with our own, and that's terrifying, not just for them, but for the people who love them too. There's something else you should know about schizophrenia. It's one of the most misunderstood and stigmatized mental illnesses in the world. For centuries, people with schizophrenia were locked away in mental institutions, treated like animals, subjected to brutal treatments that would seem like torture to us today. Even now, in the 21st century, there are people who believe that schizophrenia is the fault of the person who has it, that they could cure themselves if they just tried harder, that they're dangerous, that they should be locked up. But the reality is very different. Most people with schizophrenia aren't violent. In fact, they're more likely to be victims of violence than to commit it. They're people who fight every day against a brain that lies to them, that shows them things that don't exist and that tells them horrible things. And despite all that, they try to live a life as normal as possible. Danny was one of those people. Danny was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia at the age of 22. He'd been a normal young man until then, studying engineering, having friends, having a girlfriend. But something changed when he turned 22. He started hearing voices. At first, they were whispers, almost imperceptible. Danny thought it was stress, that it was lack of sleep, that it was his imagination. But the voices got louder, and they started telling him things, horrible things, that his friends hated him, that his girlfriend was cheating on him, that people were following him. Danny stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped leaving his room, And one day, in the middle of a crisis, he destroyed everything in his room. Broke mirrors, broke furniture, broke windows, because the voices told him there were hidden cameras, that they were watching him. That day, Danny was admitted to a mental institution for the first time. He was 22 years old, and his life, as he knew it, was over. Carl, the older brother, was the only one who didn't abandon him. Danny and Carl's parents had died years earlier. In a car accident, there were no other siblings, no close aunts or uncles, no cousins who wanted to get involved. Only Carl. And Carl swore he would never leave his brother alone. When Danny got out of the hospital after 3 months, Carl took him to live with him and Maggie. Maggie was 26 years old. Then, she'd been married to Carl for 2 years, and suddenly, she had to learn to live with a brother-in-law who heard voices. It wasn't easy. The first few months were hell. Danny had episodes almost every night. He woke up screaming, talked to people who didn't exist. Sometimes he became aggressive. Maggie was scared many times, but Carl was always there, calming his brother, reminding him that the voices weren't real, giving him his medication. And little by little, Maggie learned that Danny wasn't dangerous, learned that the voices scared him more than anyone else, learned that behind the illness, there was a human being, a young man who had lost everything because of something he couldn't control, and she learned to love him, not as a wife, not as a sister, but as family, because that's what Danny was, family. 4 years passed. Danny had ups and downs, 2 more hospitalizations, medication changes, good days and terrible days, but always with Carl and Maggie by his side. Until Carl died. It was a Tuesday morning. Maggie was making breakfast when she got the call. There was an accident at the construction site. Carl's at the hospital. Come quickly. Maggie rushed to the hospital, but when she arrived, it was too late. Carl had died in the ambulance, got head trauma. The beam had struck his head. He didn't suffer, the doctors told her. It was instantaneous, as if that were any comfort. Maggie was left alone. A widow at 32. No children, no parents, no siblings of her own, only Danny. And Danny didn't know his brother was gone. Maggie had to tell him. It was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. Danny didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't destroy anything. He just stared into nothingness. For 3 days he didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't sleep. And when he finally spoke, what he said broke Maggie's heart. The voices were right. Everyone who loves me dies. I should die too. That night, Maggie found Danny in the bathroom, with a razor blade in his hand, staring at his wrists. Maggie took the blade from him, held him close, and cried with him for hours. That night, she made a decision. She wasn't going to abandon Danny, no matter how difficult it was, no matter what people thought of her for taking care of her dead husband's brother. Danny was family, and you don't abandon family. Danny was admitted into the mental institution again after that episode, this time for 2 months. When he came out, something had changed. He wasn't exactly better, but he was different. The voices were still there. But Danny had started doing something new, drawing. It had started in the hospital. A therapist had given him colored pencils and paper. Draw what you see, she'd told him. Draw the voices. Draw what you feel. And Danny drew. At first, they were just scribbles, meaningless lines, splatters of color. But little by little, the drawings began to take shape. Faces, landscapes, creatures, things only Danny could see. When Maggie saw the first drawings, she didn't know what to think. They were disturbing, but they were also beautiful. In a strange way she couldn't explain. She bought him more pencils. Then she bought him paints. And Danny kept drawing. It was the only thing that calmed him. When the voices got too loud, Danny drew. And somehow, putting the images on paper, got them out of his head. Maggie didn't know anything about art, but she knew that when Danny drew, the crises were less intense, and that was enough. If this video is making you think about someone you know, someone living with a mental illness, stick around until the end, because what you're about to discover will change the way you see things. 2 years after Carl's death, Maggie had to find work. Carl's life insurance had run out, the savings were gone too, and Danny's medication was expensive. Very expensive. The antipsychotics Danny took cost over $300 a month, and that's not even counting the visits to the psychiatrist, the therapy sessions, the blood tests to monitor the side effects. Maggie had sold almost everything she owned: the car, the furniture that wasn't essential, the jewelry Carl had given her. But the money always ran out. Maggie looked for a job for months, but nobody wanted to hire her when they found out about her situation. "You live with a schizophrenic. That's dangerous. We can't take the risk." That's what they told her in 3 different places. As if Danny was a wild animal. As if living with him was a crime. Maggie learned not to mention Danny in interviews. Finally, she found a job as a housekeeper at the Hayes' residence. The pay was good. The hours were long, but flexible. And the Hayes seemed like good people. There was one problem. Danny couldn't be left alone, not for 8 hours, but it was too long. He could have a crisis. He could hurt himself. He could wander out into the street and get lost. Maggie couldn't afford a caretaker, and she didn't have anyone else who could help. So she did the only thing she could do. She started bringing Danny to work. In secret. Every morning, Maggie arrived an hour before everyone else. She took Danny to a small room in the back of the house, a spare room that almost no one used. She left him his medication, his pencils, paper, food, and water. And she told him to stay quiet, not to make any noise, to draw. Danny obeyed, not because he understood exactly what was happening, but because drawing was the only thing he wanted to do. Every 3 hours, Maggie went to check on him. She gave him his medication on time, brought him more paper when he ran out, and made sure he was calm, and it was risky. If the Hayes found out that she had brought her schizophrenic brother-in-law to their house, they would fire her immediately. But Maggie had no choice. It was either that or leave Danny alone, and leaving him alone was not an option. So a year passed. 365 days of secrets, of arriving early, of hiding Danny, of checking every 3 hours. No one suspected anything, or so Maggie thought. Until Patricia Hayes found the sketchbook. If you want to know what happened when Patricia discovered the truth, stick around until the end, because what's coming next will shock you. Now let me tell you about the objects Maggie used to take care of Danny. The first object was a box of colored pencils. It wasn't a new box. It was an old, worn box, with pencils used down to the nub. Some were barely an inch long. Maggie didn't throw them away because Danny had become attached to them. Each color had a meaning for him. Blue was for the quiet days. Red was for when the voices screamed. Yellow was for moments of clarity. Black was for the fears. Maggie had learned to read Danny's mood by looking at what colors he used. If she saw a lot of black in his drawings, she knew it was going to be a difficult day. If she saw blue and yellow, she knew he was having a good day. It was their way of communicating. Because sometimes Danny couldn't use words, but he could always use colors. The second object was the sketchbook, the same one Patricia had found. Maggie had bought it at a cheap stationery store. It cost less than $2. But for Danny, that sketchbook was everything. It had over 200 pages filled with drawings. Each page told a story. The first pages were chaotic, lines going in all directions, shapeless smudges. But as you moved through the sketchbook, the drawings changed. They became more organized, more detailed, more beautiful. It was like seeing the evolution of a mind struggling to find order in the chaos. Maggie didn't know those drawings had artistic value. To her, they were just evidence that her brother-in-law was getting better, that the art therapy was working. It was through Danny that Maggie was finding a way to express what words simply couldn't. Patricia Hayes couldn't sleep that night. After finding the sketchbook, she had spent hours just staring at it. Page by page, drawing by drawing. And the more she looked, the more certain she became. This was genuine art. It wasn't academic art. It wasn't technical art. It didn't follow any school or movement. It was something more primitive, more visceral. It was what they called art brut in the art world. Raw art. The kind of art that people without artistic training create. Without external influences, without any intention to sell or impress. Pure art. And it was exactly the kind of art that the most sophisticated collectors paid fortunes to acquire. Patricia knew this world. She had sold pieces of art brut for hundreds of thousands of dollars in her days as a gallery owner. She knew how to recognize the potential. And the potential of these drawings was enormous. But there was something else, something that Patricia didn't want to admit, something that had kept her awake all night. These drawings, they reminded her of someone she had lost many years ago. The next morning, Patricia called Maggie to her office. Maggie entered, trembling. She was sure she was going to be fired. Patricia had found the sketchbook. She knew that she had been secretly bringing someone into the house. This was the end. "Sit down, Maggie." Patricia gestured to the chair in front of her desk. Maggie sat down. Her hands were shaking. "I found this in the guest room." Patricia placed the sketchbook on the desk. Maggie closed her eyes. Here it comes, she thought. The firing. The end of everything. Who is Danny? The question took Maggie by surprise. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. Maggie opened her eyes. Patricia was looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "My brother-in-law, ma'am. My late husband's brother. My husband passed 6 years ago." Patricia nodded. "And Danny has schizophrenia?" "Yes, ma'am, since he was 22. "And you've been bringing him here, to my house, in secret?" Maggie lowered her gaze. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I know I broke the rules. I know I should have told you. But I didn't have another option. I can't leave him alone. I can't afford someone to take care of him, and I don't have anyone else." Tears began to fall. "Please, ma'am, I beg you. Let me finish the week. I need to find another job before I leave. Danny depends on me. He's all I have." Maggie was openly crying now. 4 years of secrets. 4 years of fear. And it had all come to an end. Patricia didn't say anything for a long moment. She just looked at the sketchbook, turning the pages slowly. And then she said something that Maggie didn't expect. "These drawings are extraordinary." Maggie looked up. "What?" "They're extraordinary. Exceptional. I've never seen anything like it." Maggie didn't understand. She thought she was going to be fired. And instead, her boss was praising Danny's drawings. "Ma'am, I don't understand." Patricia closed the sketchbook. "Maggie, I was a gallery owner for 20 years. I sold art for millions of dollars. I worked with artists from all over the world. I know how to recognize talent when I see it." She paused. "Your brother-in-law has talent. Real talent. The kind of talent that collectors pay fortunes to find." Maggie still didn't understand. "But Mom, Danny's sick. He doesn't know what he's doing. He just draws because it calms him down." Patricia smiled. "That's exactly what makes his art valuable. There's no commercial intention, no ego, no external influences, just the pure expression of a mind that sees the world differently." Patricia stood up. "I want to meet him." Maggie froze. "What?" I want to meet Danny. I want to see how he works. I want to see more of his paintings. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. Danny's not good with strangers. Visits make him nervous. He could have an episode. Patricia nodded. I understand it, but I need you to trust me. I'm not going to hurt him. I'm not going to scare him. I just want to see him work. She paused. And I'm not going to fire you. If that's what you're worried about. Maggie couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're not going to fire me? No. But in return, I want you to let me meet Danny. And let me help you. Help me? Patricia sat down again. Look, Maggie, I have contacts in the art world. Galleries, collectors, curators. If Danny's paintings are as good as I think they are, we can do something with them. I don't understand it. We can sell them. We can organize an exhibition. We can show the world what your brother-in-law can do. Maggie shook her head. Ma'am, Danny doesn't paint to sell. He paints because it's the only thing that keeps him sane. If I tell him his paintings are going to be sold, I don't know how he'll react. Patricia nodded. You're right. But think about this. If his paintings sell, you'll have money for his medication. You'll have money to pay someone to take care of him when you can't. You'll have options that you don't have now. Maggie hadn't thought about that. It was true. Money had always been a problem. Danny's medications cost hundreds of dollars a month, and she barely earned enough to survive. If Danny's paintings could be sold, let me think about it, Mom. It's a lot to process. Patricia nodded. Take all the time you need, but in the meantime, I want you to move Danny to a better room. The spare room isn't a place for someone to spend 8 hours a day. Maggie couldn't believe what she was hearing. Not only was she not going to be fired, but her boss wanted to help Danny. It was too good to be true, but it wasn't. It was real. That afternoon, Maggie took Danny to a different room, a guest room on the second floor. It had a comfortable bed, a private bathroom, natural light coming through a large window, and space to paint. Danny looked at the room with suspicion. Why are we here? Because the lady of the house said we can use this room. Danny frowned. She knows I'm here. Yes. And she's not angry. No. Danny didn't say anything else. But Maggie could see that he was confused. In his experience, people always got angry when they found out he was around. People were always afraid. But this time, it was different. And Danny didn't know how to process that. That night, Patricia told Maggie the truth that she had kept hidden for 15 years. The reason why she had left the art world. The reason why she lived in this enormous mansion with her distant husband. That's why she had seen something special in Danny's drawings. I had a son, Patricia began. Her voice was heavy with unshed tears. His name was Sebastian. Maggie listened in silence, her heart aching for the woman before her. Sebastian was brilliant, intelligent, creative. Patricia's voice cracked. From a young age, he loved to draw. He would spend hours creating imaginary worlds on paper. Patricia paused, lost in a memory. When he was 18, he started to change. He became paranoid. He said people were following him, that there were hidden messages for him on TV. Schizophrenia? Maggie asked softly. Patricia nodded, a single tear escaping. He was diagnosed at 19. It was devastating. My son, the brilliant boy who drew entire worlds, suddenly couldn't distinguish reality from his hallucinations. Tears streamed down Patricia's face now, a torrent of grief. We tried everything, the best doctors, the best hospitals, the most expensive medications. But nothing worked. Sebastian got worse every day. And his art. Maggie ventured gently. Patricia closed her eyes, as if blocking out a painful image. That's the worst part, she whispered. I was an art dealer. I lived surrounded by art. But when Sebastian started drawing what he saw in his hallucinations, I told him to stop. Why? Maggie asked, stunned. Because I was afraid. Patricia confessed, her voice barely audible. His drawings were dark, disturbing, and they frightened me. And I thought foolishly that if he stopped drawing those things, maybe he would stop seeing them. Patricia opened her eyes, meeting Maggie's with raw vulnerability. It was the worst mistake of my life. Maggie didn't know what to say. Her own heart constricted with empathy. I took away the only thing that helped him process what he was experiencing. I took away his form of expression. I took away his art. Patricia covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 6 months later, Sebastian committed suicide. He was 25 years old. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with unspoken grief. Maggie felt the weight of those words, the full force of Patricia's pain, the pain of a mother who had lost her child, the regret of a lifetime. Since then, I left the art world, Patricia continued, her voice regaining a fragile strength. I couldn't look at it without thinking about Sebastian, without thinking about what I had taken away. Patricia looked up, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. But when I saw Danny's drawings, it was like seeing my son's drawings again. And I knew I had to do something, that I couldn't let another artist be lost, the way Sebastian was lost. Maggie finally understood the depth of Patricia's purpose. That's why she wanted to meet Danny. That's why she wanted to help. It wasn't just about the art, it was about redemption. It was about a second chance to make things right. I want to organize an exhibition, Patricia declared, her voice firm. I want to show the world what Danny can do. I want people to see that the minds we call ill can create beauty, that normal people could never imagine. Maggie was speechless, overwhelmed by the weight of Patricia's proposition. It was a lot, too much maybe, but it was also an opportunity, a chance for Danny. An opportunity that Danny had never had, an opportunity that Sebastian never had. Okay, Maggie said finally, her voice resonating with resolve. Let's do it. The third object Maggie used was Danny's first complete canvas. It wasn't large, about 20 by 30 inches, but it was the first time Danny had finished a complete painting. Not a sketch, not a quick drawing, a real painting. He had called it the Garden of Voices. It was an impossible landscape. Trees with leaves of crystal, flowers that looked like eyes, a sky that was half day and half night at the same time, and in the center a figure, a person with no face, looking directly at the viewer. When Maggie first saw that painting, she felt something she couldn't explain. It was beautiful, but it was also disturbing. It was like looking inside someone's mind, seeing what they see, feeling what they feel. Patricia saw that painting 2 weeks after meeting Danny, and she stood staring at it for an entire hour, without saying a word, with tears streaming down her cheeks. When she finally spoke, she only said one thing, her voice choked with emotion. This is exactly what my son would have painted if we had given him the chance. The following weeks were a whirlwind, a flurry of activity. Patricia contacted an old friend, Ricardo Fuentes, owner of a contemporary art gallery in the downtown area. She sent him photos of Danny's paintings. Ricardo called the next day, his voice buzzing with excitement. Patricia, where did you find this? It's incredible. He's the brother-in-law of my housekeeper, Patricia explained. He has schizophrenia. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a moment of stunned realization. You're talking about genuine art brute, Ricardo said, his voice hushed. Yes, Patricia confirmed. I need to see it. I need to see him work, Ricardo insisted. If this is real, Patricia, we're talking about something very special. Ricardo visited the Hayes mansion 3 days later. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair, round glasses, and hands that moved constantly when he talked about art. Maggie was nervous, anticipating what was to come. Danny was even more nervous. Dread filled him. I don't like people, he told Maggie that morning, his voice barely a whisper. They make too much noise. Not the kind of noise from outside, but the noise their presences made in his head. But Maggie convinced him, gently, patiently. He's just going to look, she assured him. You don't have to talk to him, just keep painting like you always do. Danny reluctantly agreed. When Ricardo entered the room, Danny was already painting, lost in his world. A new work, in progress. This one was different from the others. It was a portrait, the face of a woman, but the face was fragmented, like a broken mirror. Each fragment showed a different expression: joy, sadness, fear, peace. Ricardo stood watching for 20 minutes, without saying a word, completely captivated by Danny's genius. Danny continued painting, oblivious to Ricardo's presence, as if he wasn't even there. Finally, Ricardo approached Maggie and Patricia. His eyes were moist, glistening with unshed tears. "This is the most authentic thing I've seen in 30 years in this business," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. "He has no idea what he's doing, does he?" "No," Maggie replied. "He just paints what he sees." Ricardo nodded, his gaze returning to Danny with admiration. "That's exactly what makes him invaluable." 2 weeks later, Ricardo made a proposal, an offer they couldn't refuse. He wanted to organize an exhibition, 12 works by Danny Hayes in his gallery, with select guests, collectors, critics, people from the art world. Patricia immediately accepted. Her dreams were about to come true. Maggie wasn't so sure. Her worry for Danny outweighed her ambition. "Can Danny attend the exhibition?" she asked cautiously. Ricardo frowned slightly. He hadn't considered that. "It would be ideal," he admitted. "Collectors want to meet the artist. It adds authenticity." Maggie shook her head, her expression filled with concern. "Danny can't be in places with a lot of people. It overwhelms him. He could have an episode." Ricardo thought for a moment. He understood. "What if we do something more intimate?" he suggested. "Just 10 people. In a small space, guitar with soft music, no camera flashes." Maggie looked at Danny, who was on the other side of the room, lost in his own world, oblivious to the conversation. "I'd have to ask him," she said softly, her eyes filled with apprehension. That night, Maggie spoke with Danny. It was the most difficult conversation they had had in years. "Danny, there are people who want to see your paintings," she began gently. Danny frowned, confused and wary. "Why?" he asked, his voice filled with suspicion. "Because they think they're beautiful," Maggie explained, her heart pounding in her chest. "They're the voices," Danny protested, his voice laced with fear. "They're not beautiful. They're what I see when the voices won't let me sleep." Maggie took his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "I know," she said softly, "but normal people can't see what you see. And when people look at your paintings, they can feel a little bit of that world and they find that special." Danny looked at her, confused. "Why would they want to feel that? It's horrible." "Not everything is horrible, Danny. Some of your drawings are peaceful, some are beautiful, some show things that normal people could never imagine." Danny lowered his gaze. "Carl used to say the same thing." "I know. He said my drawings were like windows to a world that only I could see." Maggie felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Your brother was right." Danny looked directly at her. "If I go to this exhibition, will you stay with me? The whole time. And if the voices get too loud, we'll leave. No questions, no explanations. We'll just go." Danny nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll go." The next 3 weeks were intense. Patricia and Ricardo selected Danny's 12 best works. Each one was professionally framed. Each one was photographed for the catalogue. And each one received a title. The fourth object was the exhibition catalogue, a small 20-page book with photos of Danny's 12 works: Invisible Melodies, The Fragmented Face, Crystal Dreams, The Guardian of Shadows, Voices in Color, The Inner Labyrinth, Shattered Dawn, The Dance of Silence, Echoes from Another World, The Garden of Voices, Liquid Memories, The Peace of Chaos. The catalogue was beautiful. On the cover was The Garden of Voices. Danny's first complete painting, and on the back cover a text that Patricia had written personally. The art of Danny Hayes is not the product of academic training or artistic influence. It is the pure expression of a mind that perceives the world differently. His paintings are windows to a reality that most of us will never see. They are reminders that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places, even in the shadows, especially in the shadows. The night of the exhibition arrived. It was a Thursday in December. It was cold outside, but inside the gallery, the atmosphere was warm, soft lights, classical music playing softly, champagne in crystal glasses, and Danny's 12 paintings on the walls. Maggie had spent hours preparing Danny. She had given him his medication on time. She had explained what was going to happen. She had promised him that he could leave at any moment. Danny arrived wearing a suit that Patricia had bought him. It was the first time Maggie had seen him so elegant, and it was also the first time she had seen him so scared. "There are so many people," he whispered when they walked in. "Only 10 people, Maggie told him, like we promised. Danny nodded, but his hands were trembling. The first 30 minutes were difficult. Danny stayed in a corner. He didn't talk to anyone. He just stared at his own paintings, as if he were seeing them for the first time. Maggie stayed by his side the whole time. She held his hand when the voices got too loud. She spoke to him softly when she saw that he was about to panic, and slowly, very slowly, Danny began to relax. Then something unexpected happened. A man approached. He was about 60 years old. Expensive suit. A watch that was worth more than Maggie's apartment. He introduced himself as Edward Villanueva, an art collector, one of the most important in the country. "Mr. Hayes," he said, looking at Danny, "your paintings are extraordinary." Danny didn't answer. He just looked at him. "May I ask you something?" Danny nodded slightly. "This painting, the fragmented face, who is the woman?" Danny looked at the painting, the portrait with the face broken into 1,000 pieces. "It's everyone," he said finally. "It's how I see people. Fragmented, each part showing something different. I can never see the whole face, only the fragments." Edward Villanueva was silent, and then he said something that would change everything. "I want to buy it, and I want to buy 3 others." Maggie almost fainted. That night, Edward Villanueva bought 4 of Danny's paintings. The fragmented face, the guardian of shadows, the piece of chaos, liquid memories. He paid $80,000 for the 4, $80,000, more than Maggie would earn in 5 years of work. But Edward wasn't the only one. 2 other collectors bought works that night. A woman named Fernanda bought Voices in Color and Shattered Dawn. A man named Arthur bought The Inner Labyrinth and Crystal Dreams. In total, 8 of the 12 paintings were sold, for a total of $120,000. $120,000. Danny didn't understand the numbers. He didn't care. He only cared that people had wanted to see what he saw, that people hadn't been afraid, that people had found beauty in the chaos of his mind. That night, when they returned home, Danny said something that made Maggie cry. "Carl was right. My drawings are windows. And today, for the first time, someone looked through them and didn't run away." It was the first time in years that Danny had spoken about his brother without crying. It was the first time he had mentioned Carl with something resembling peace, and Maggie knew that something had changed. But that wasn't the only change that night. Something else had happened at the exhibition, something that Maggie hadn't noticed at the time. Edward Villanueva, the collector who had bought 4 paintings, had approached Patricia at the end of the night. They had talked for almost an hour, and what he had said would change everything. Edward had a grandson. His name was Lucas. He was 19 years old, and 6 months ago he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. The family was devastated, Edward told Patricia. "We didn't know what to do. The doctors talked about medications, about therapies, about hospitalizations. It all sounded so hopeless." Patricia understood that feeling. She had lived it with Sebastian. "But then I saw Danny's paintings," Edward continued, "and for the first time I felt that there was some hope, that my grandson could have a life, that he could do something meaningful despite the illness. Edward paused. I want Danny to meet Lucas. I want him to teach him how to paint. I want my grandson to see that there is another way to live with this disease. Patricia didn't know what to say. She would have to ask Danny and Maggie, but the idea seemed right to her. 2 weeks later, Lucas visited the mansion. He was a tall young man, thin, with deep, dark circles under his eyes and hands that trembled constantly, the effect of the medications. Danny recognized him immediately. You hear them too, he said as soon as he saw him. Lucas nodded. All the time. What are they saying? Danny looked down. Horrible things, that my family hates me, that it would be better if I were dead. Hayes nodded. Mine tell me the same thing. There was a silence. And then Hayes did something that surprised everyone. He picked up a paintbrush and dipped it in red paint and offered it to Danny. Draw what you hear, but sometimes when you put it on paper, how it stops screaming so loudly in your head. Danny took the paintbrush and his hands were shaking, but he started to paint. Red lines, aggressive, chaotic. Hayes sat next to him and started painting too. They didn't speak for an hour, just painted, each in their own world, but together. When they finished, Danny looked at his painting. It was a mess of lines and blotches. It had no shape, no meaning. But there was something in it, an energy, an honesty. This is awful, Danny said. Hayes shook his head. This is truth, and the truth is never awful. It's just hard to look at. Danny stared at the painting for another moment, and then, for the first time since the diagnosis, he smiled. Can I come back tomorrow? Hayes nodded. You can come back whenever you want. There's always room here for minds that see things differently. Danny came back the next day, and the next, and the next. He started painting regularly with Hayes, not as therapist and patient, but as two people who shared something that no one else could understand. Eduardo Villanueva cried every time he received news of his grandson. Danny's getting better, he told Patricia. The episodes are less frequent. He's taking his medication without a fight, and for the first time since the diagnosis, he has something to look forward to every day. Art had given Danny the same thing it had given Hayes: purpose, a reason to keep going, a channel for the voices that wouldn't be silenced. And Maggie knew that something had changed, not the illness. The schizophrenia was still there, the voices were still there, the episodes would still come, but something else had changed. Hayes had found a purpose, nor was a reason to keep painting, a reason to keep fighting, and sometimes that's all a person needs. Now, let me tell you where they are today. 8 months have passed since the exhibition. Hayes still has schizophrenia. The illness hasn't disappeared. But something did change. After the exhibition, his psychiatrist, Dr. Alex Ruiz, noticed a significant improvement. The crisis episodes decreased by 60%. The voices were still there, but they were less aggressive, less constant, as if art had given them another channel to express themselves. Dr. Ruiz wrote an article about Hayes's case. He published it in a specialized medical journal. He talked about how art therapy, combined with appropriate medication, could significantly improve the quality of life for patients with schizophrenia. Hayes became a case study, but for Maggie, he wasn't a case study. He was her brother-in-law, her family. The man she had promised to take care of when Carl died. The money from the sales changed everything. Maggie was able to hire a caregiver for Hayes, a kind woman named Rosa, who came 3 times a week. That meant that Maggie no longer had to hide Hayes at her job. She no longer had to live in fear of being discovered. She no longer had to carry everything alone. Patricia made sure that Maggie kept her job, but now it was different. She was no longer just a housekeeper. She was also Hayes's representative, the person who made sure his paintings got to the right people, the person who protected his art and his dignity. Ricardo, the art dealer, organized 2 more exhibitions in the following months, one in another city, one in a contemporary art museum. Each exhibition sold more than the previous one. Hayes's paintings began to be known in the art world. Articles in specialized magazines, mentions on critics' blogs, comparisons with the great artists of the Art Brut movement. Hayes didn't understand any of that. He didn't care. He only cared about painting. But there was something he did understand. He understood that for the first time in his life, people looked at him differently, not with fear, not with pity, but with respect. And that, for someone who had spent 13 years being treated like a madman, was more valuable than any amount of money. One day, a journalist from an art magazine visited the mansion. He wanted to do an article about Hayes. Maggie was nervous. She didn't know how Hayes was going to react to questions from a stranger, but Patricia convinced her. This is important. People need to know that people with mental illnesses can create art, that they have value, that they deserve respect. Maggie agreed. The journalist arrived on Tuesday morning. He was a young man, 30-something, horn-rimmed glasses, notebook in hand. He introduced himself as Michael. Hayes looked at him suspiciously. "Are you going to write things about me?" "Yes, with your permission. I want people to know your story." "Why?" "Because I think it's important. Because I think your art can help other people understand what it's like to live with schizophrenia." Hayes thought for a moment, and then he said something that surprised everyone. "Okay, but I want you to write the truth. I don't want you to make me look like a hero. I don't want you to make me look like a victim. I just want you to write what you see." Michael nodded. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." The interview lasted 3 hours. Michael asked about the voices, about the medications, about the hospitalizations. Hayes answered with honesty, sometimes brutal. "The voices tell me to kill myself," he said at one point, "almost every day, but I don't listen to them anymore, because now I have something to do. I have to paint." Michael wrote down every word. The article was published a month later. It was called "The Artist Who Paints the Voices." It took up 6 pages of the magazine, with photos of Hayes's paintings, with photos of Hayes working in his studio, and with an interview that showed, without filters, what it was like to live with schizophrenia. The article went viral. Thousands of people shared it on social media, hundreds of comments from people who had family members with mental illnesses, stories from people who felt identified, messages of gratitude for talking about a subject that no one wanted to touch, and something else, something that no one expected. Other. Families began to contact Patricia, families with children, siblings, parents with schizophrenia. "We want our family member to have the same opportunity there," they said. "We want him to try art therapy. We want someone to see value in what he creates." Patricia couldn't help everyone, but she could do something. She contacted a mental health foundation, right, and together they created a program. It was called Art Without Voices. It was an art workshop for people with mental illnesses, with specialized therapists, with donated materials, with a safe space to create without judgment. Danny was the first guest instructor. He didn't exactly teach classes. He just painted. And the other participants painted with him. In silence. Each one in their own world, but sharing the space, sharing the experience. Maggie said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, seeing Danny surrounded by other people like him, seeing that he wasn't alone, seeing that there was a place in the world for minds that see differently, and now he had everything he needed to do it. His own studio in the Hayes' house. Patricia had given him an entire room just for him, with natural light, with space for large canvases, with all the materials he could ever need. Danny spent hours there, painting what he saw, painting what he heard, painting the world that only he could perceive. And Patricia found something she had lost 15 years ago: purpose. After Sebastian's death, she had turned away from art. She couldn't look at it without thinking of her son, without thinking of the mistake she had made. But now, helping Danny, she felt like she was repairing something. She couldn't bring Sebastian back. She couldn't undo the past, but she could make sure that another artist with a different mind had the opportunity that Sebastian never had. It was her way of healing, her way of honoring her son's memory, her way of turning guilt into something useful. There's something else I want to tell you about Patricia. Something that happened 2 months ago. Patricia visited Sebastian's grave. It was something she did every year, on the anniversary of his death. But this year was different. This year, she wasn't alone. She took Danny with her. She didn't know why she had done it. She just felt it was the right thing to do. Danny had never met Sebastian, never even seen him. But when he got to the grave, he said something that Patricia would never forget. "He's here. I can feel him." Patricia didn't say anything. She just waited. "He's not sad," Danny continued. "He's relieved. Like he's been waiting for someone to come and tell him that it's okay." Patricia felt the tears falling. "What do you mean?" Danny looked at the tombstone. The voices he heard, were they similar to mine? Patricia nodded. "Yes, very similar." Danny thought for a moment. "When the voices are too strong, sometimes I think it would be easier to just stop fighting, stop resisting, let them win." Patricia held her breath. "But then I think about Maggie, about how much it would hurt her if I wasn't around, and I keep fighting." Danny looked at Patricia. "Your son didn't have anyone like Maggie, did he?" Patricia shook her head. The tears were falling freely now. "I should have been his Maggie, but I failed him. I took away the only thing that helped him." Danny nodded. "But now you're here, with me, doing what you couldn't do with him." He paused. "I think that counts for something. I think he knows it. And I think he's proud of you." Patricia collapsed. She cried like she hadn't cried in years. All the guilt, all the pain, all the regret, finally coming out. Danny sat down beside her. He didn't say anything. He just put a hand on her shoulder, and they waited together until the tears stopped. When Patricia got up, she felt different, lighter, as if a weight she had carried for 15 years had finally lifted. "Thank you," she said to Danny. Danny looked at her, confused. "Why?" "For giving me another chance. For letting me do things right this time." Danny shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank Maggie. She's the one who saved me. She's the one who made all of this possible." Patricia nodded. "You're right." That night, Patricia wrote a letter to Maggie. She didn't give it to her in person. She left it on her desk for her to find in the morning. The letter said many things, but the most important thing was this: "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for believing in Danny when no one else did. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to redeem my mistakes. You are the strongest person I have ever known. And I hope that someday you can see how extraordinary you are." Maggie cried when she read that letter. Not from sadness. From something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Pride for what she had accomplished. Pride for not having given up. Pride for having kept the promise she made to Carl. Maggie told me something the last time we talked. She said that sometimes, and when she watches Danny paint, she can feel Carl in the room, like her husband is there, watching his brother, proud of what he has become, proud that Maggie has fulfilled her promise to take care of him. And that, in the end, is what this story is about. About love, about second chances, about minds that the world calls broken, but that can create beauty that the normal never could imagine. There's one last thing I want to tell you. Last week, Danny finished a new painting. It's his largest work so far. About 5 feet by 6.5 feet. He called it The Invisible Family. It's a portrait of 3 people: Carl, the brother who died, Maggie, the sister-in-law who saved him, and a blurred figure that could be anyone, or no one, or everyone. When Maggie saw the painting, she couldn't speak for 10 minutes. Carl was there, not like a photo, but as a presence, as Danny remembered him, as Danny felt him. "That's your husband," Danny said to her. "That's how I see him when I think of him. He's always there, always watching, always taking care." Maggie cried, but not from sadness, from something she didn't know how to name. Gratitude, maybe, for having Danny, for having Patricia, for having a family that she hadn't looked for, but that she had found anyway. Patricia wants the painting to stay in the mansion, not to sell it, but to remember that different minds aren't broken minds, to remember that love can come from the most unexpected places, to remember that it's always worth fighting for. If you know someone with schizophrenia or any other mental illness, if you know someone that society has dismissed as crazy, if you know someone who has a hidden gift that no one else seems to appreciate, share this video with them, not because it's going to solve all of their problems, but because, maybe, it will remind them that their mind is not a curse, that what they see has value, and that sometimes they just need someone to believe in them. In the pinned comment below, I've left a question for you. Do you know someone with a mental illness who possesses an extraordinary hidden talent, someone who society underestimates, but who has incredible gifts? Tell me their story in the comments below, because every mind deserves to be seen, and every artist deserves to be heard, even if their voices come from a place we can't quite understand. Thank you for staying until the end. If this video touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to see more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue telling stories of extraordinary people, people who see what others can't, people who create beauty where others only see chaos, people like Danny, and perhaps people like someone you know.